This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Roger McEowen, K-State and Washburn law professor, begins the show as he discusses a case that helps bring to light boundary line concerns between U.S. Forest Service land and private property. Continuing the show is Charlotte Nugent from New South Wales, Australia, as she recaps her time in Kansas and at K-State as part of a program with Angus Australia. The Beef Cattle Institute's Brad White and Bob Larson, along with K-State's Jason Warner, in today's show by talking about what to have on your calving scorecard and using it to evaluate the success on the season. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show talking about a blog article from K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Well, good to be with you again, Shelby.
Roger, this blog article titled Resolving Land Disputes with the U.S. Forest Service, and what is this case that really brought this blog article to light?
Well, this is a pretty interesting case. It's a really tough situation that's been going on for the past couple of years under the Biden administration. There are some ranchers that have been ranching. They're fifth-generation farmers and ranchers in this area in South Dakota, east of the Black Hills and west of the Badlands. So if you're familiar with that area up there, there is some farm ground in between the Badlands and Forest Service land, which Custer State Park would be part of that. And, of course, the Badlands, that's where Mount Rushmore is at. So we're in that southwest corner of South Dakota. And this is Charles and Heather Maud. Charles's family had started farming in that area in 1910. And there was a line between private land and the Forest Service land. And then in the 1940s, I think it was, maybe early 50s, it's been about 70 to 80 years ago, the Forest Service put a fence in to mark the line officially. So there was a fence placed between the Maud's land and the Forest Service land. And that was done in accordance with the Forest Service survey that was done at the time. And it matched up to where the generations of the Mauds had been farming. So they just put a fence down that line. Well, the Forest Service had it resurveyed using new technology in recent years, and that showed that the Mauds were over onto Forest Service land to the tune of about 50 acres. And so didn't work this out with the Mauds. They filed criminal theft charges against Charles and Heather individually, each seeking that would have carried a 10-year prison term for each of Charles and Heather. Now, these are not these are young farmers. They have young children, and this was devastating to them. The government confiscated all their weapons and did put a gag order on them. They couldn't even talk to each other about the case. And so it was pretty gruesome for the family to go through this.
Where are we at now with the case?
Well, we had a change in administration, and the whole case finally came all the way to the White House. It got to the attention of President Trump, and there was a meeting primarily put together by Congressman Hageman out of Wyoming, Harriet Hageman. They got the Secretary of Agriculture together, Undersecretary of the Interior, as well as the Ag Secretary, along with Harriet Hageman. They had a meeting in the White House a couple of weeks ago and brought it to the President's attention, and he directed the Secretary of Agriculture to drop the case, drop all the criminal charges. So where we're at now is back to where we were before the criminal case was filed, and they're going to try to attempt to work out some resolution to this problem.
What does this mean for other properties potentially butting up to a U.S. Forest Service land?
Well, there are a lot of private landowners, particularly in the western part of the United States, that have this issue. They own land that's adjacent to Forest Service land, and they would run the risk of the same thing happening to them, perhaps. And so this sends a pretty good message that the current administration, at least, is going to uphold private property rights and try to work out solutions with farmers and ranchers in similar predicaments rather than just simply launching into criminal cases alleging that they had stolen government property.
And this isn't a case where that fence law matters.
No, and I've had lots of people ask me that. They say, well, we've got this concept of adverse possession or boundary by acquiescence. They'd been farming in accordance with a fence line, assuming that that was the property line, and that would be a boundary by acquiescence, or kind of the same thing as the opposite side of the same coin as adverse possession. Well, the problem is you can't use those theories against the federal government. Those apply to private property owners, and you can't assert adverse possession against the federal government. We've had a case like that in Kansas where it was tried to be asserted against the state government, and the court said you can't assert it against the state. So that then meant that Congress needed to do something about this, and Congress amended an existing law in the 2018 Farm Bill, which is the Farm Bill we're unfortunately still operating under, to expand the opportunity of the Ag Secretary to work out these types of boundary disputes with private landowners, and that's known as the Small Tracts Act.
And what are some points within that Small Tracts Act for what the Secretary of Agriculture can do?
Well, there are various sections of the Small Tracts Act. I think the one that's most directly relevant to the criteria for conveying small parcels and road rights-of-way to private landowners, which is what this bill allows the government to do, is that, well, there's a solution here. Let's just convey those areas in question to the private landowners that they've been farming anyway. And parcels up to 40 acres or less now, there used to be 10 acres or less. It's now 40 acres as amended by the 2018 Farm Bill. That are mixed in with or are next to lands that were transferred out of federal ownership under mining laws. That's one. Those parcels have to be determined by the Secretary to be inefficient to manage due to their location or size. More directly applicable to the situation in here, where you didn't have a mining situation that occurred, was if you've made improvements on the land in question, such as you put an irrigation well down so that you could run a pivot, which the mods do perform irrigation agriculture there. And so you've got improvements on that land, and you weren't given any advance notice that your improvements would be encroaching. So you had no idea that you were over the line onto Forest Service line. It was an innocent encroachment. Then the Act comes into play, and the Secretary of Agriculture, at the Secretary's discretion, can use that act to negotiate a deal where that you can end up being the title owner of that land in controversy. You can end up essentially buying that land at a value that the government determines.
What about for road right-of-ways when it comes to the Small Tracts Act?
Well, those can apply too. So if you have road rights-of-way, whether they're reserved or acquired, they're mostly surrounded by land that's not owned by the U.S., so it's not Forest Service land, and are no longer needed by the U.S. government. So in those cases, the owners of the land next to the right-of-way have the first opportunity to buy it.
And when we're thinking about land possibly switching hands, there's the CISC Act, and what is that?
Well, the CISC Act is basically a fund that is used to facilitate these transactions. And so it's a CISC Act fund is what it's called. And that's where the money is coming from to help facilitate these transactions, pay for the transactions, hold the money from the transactions, work out deals with landowners. There's a separate dedicated fund that Congress created to help the Secretary of Agriculture deal with these situations.
What would they do with that money they could potentially make from selling that land?
Well, the funds are to be used by the Ag Secretary for not only acquiring interests or land for recreational access. It's a mechanism for the Forest Service to adjust land ownership patterns within the National Forest Service through exchanges with private landowners, with the goal of making more efficient the management of the Forest Service land and making sure that we don't have checkerboard pieces of private land surrounded by Forest Service land where you would end up with more border issues. So it's to give an opportunity for the Forest Service to use this money to have contiguous tracts rather than pieces that are interspersed with private property where you could end up in these types of situations.
And you mentioned an irrigation well being on properties, but what if someone's accidentally built part of a barn on U.S. Forest Service property?
Yeah, that would count in the same category as an improvement. And those things happen, too. I'm sure we've got other landowners across the West where there's been some type of a structure, such as a barn or storage facility that's been put up that could be across a line someplace. Well, the Small Tracts Act is designed to deal with those situations. But again, Whether that act is used or not is completely within the discretion of the Secretary of Agriculture. I think currently the mood with the current administration and the Secretary of Agriculture is to now resolve these issues and use the Small Tracts Act as intended by Congress. But prior administration and subsequent administrations may have a different view of these things.
What does this all mean for U.S. farmers and ranchers, Roger?
Well, I think one thing it means from a political standpoint is right now, if you've got this potential issue, you want to get it cleared up now during the current administration, because who knows what the future is going to hold. But what it means is you've got a way to resolve a boundary dispute that you may not have known about that actually was expanded in the 2018 Farm Bill, which we are currently using. And so there's that mechanism that's out there. It's a potential tool, but again, it's at the Ag Secretary's discretion to use this tool to minimize these disputes with private landowners.
If people want to find out more information about this or think they might have an issue with it, what's your recommendation?
Well, they can read the full article on my blog, and that's accessible through my website, which is WashburnLaw.edu/WALTR, as well as on AgManager at K-State.
Roger, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks again, Shelby.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen discussing his recent blog article titled Resolving Land Disputes with the U.S. Forest Service. If you would like to read this article, I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. You can also find this article and other articles by going to AgManager.info or by going to WashburnLaw.edu/WALTR. Again, those addresses are AgManager.info and WashburnLaw.edu/WALTR. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking with Charlotte Nugent from New South Wales, Australia. Charlotte, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Charlotte, all the way from Australia, what brought you to K-State?
So I'm lucky to be the recipient of the Angus Australia 2024/25 K-State Exchange Scholarship. So that's sort of why I'm here and sort of a big part of my journey to get me here, yeah.
And before we talk about your time at K-State, first wanting to look at home for you and what does home involve? What part of agriculture did you grow up in?
So I grew up on the land. My family had a mixed farming operation sort of in the southern part of New South Wales. So we are in the business of trading market cattle. So we're buying weaners on a grass-fed finish, selling them directly to the processor. And then we've also got a sort of a small crossbred sheep herd as well.
Would you consider raising sheep and cattle together pretty common in Australia?
Yeah, they graze differently. So in terms of sort of that sort of mixed farming operation, it's really quite good for the land. Just, the cattle graze a little higher off the ground, the sheep can graze a little harsher. But yeah, it's quite a common practice given sort of your location.
How have you seen agriculture change in Australia as you've been there for most of your life?
Yeah, I mean, personally, when I was younger, agriculture really wasn't a huge part of my life. Like growing up on the land, I was I was into riding horses and I did all of that. But it wasn't until I sort of got into it throughout my high school that I really started to have a passion and sort of open my eyes to what really has been right in front of me my whole life. So I guess broad spectrum, I sort of missed a little bit of that younger years, but it would definitely be the same as it is sort of globally, the technology that's come through and changed just, the way my family doesn't, but those large cropping operations, the way that technology really has influenced their operations. We've got GPSs and tractors. We've got all of this, which, going back even the 20 odd years since I've been on the earth, like it really has changed quite a lot. And technology is really starting to become a big part of the livestock production industry as well now, as we look to different technologies for calving and, tracking. Like you guys have the EIDs here. We have an NRLS system in Australia, which is a National Livestock Identification scheme, I'm pretty sure it is. But it's basically a national database for traceability. So we trace all cattle within the Australian herd right from birth to death. So that's sort of become a big thing, and that's really kept improving basically since I've been around. It's been around as long as I can remember, much before I was born. But, you know, they're bringing out ways to sort of bring all of that online. So,
what are some of your favorite aspects of Australian agriculture?
I really don't know. I guess that's an interesting question. Growing up, I took my time to sort of develop my appreciation for it. But I just love, and I mean, I guess it's not just in Australia, but it's globally, the way that agriculture and farmers and producers, and they feed the world. And it's a big part of, like, we literally wouldn't be here if it wasn't for agriculture. And I think that's really my biggest admiration for it. You know, like, we wouldn't be wearing clothes. We wouldn't have food in our stomachs. We wouldn't have a roof over our head. Like, so many people don't realize the tiny little facets that are considered agriculture, right from, you know, honeybees through to cattle production. So yeah, it's really cool, just the broad spectrum of it.
And how did you continue your education? What's your degree in?
So I completed high school in 2020. So I was a little COVID high school graduate, which kind of actually did alter the trajectory for kind of where I took my life a little bit. It sounds a little bit cliche, I suppose, but I had a big plan to take a gap year, either head sort of up to Northern Australia and go work on a cattle station, or I had planned to come and spend my year through the United States and Canada. But obviously sort of traveling wasn't really an option at that point in time. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm just going to get straight into my university, and that's what I'm going to do. So in my grade school, I took business, and I absolutely loved my business studies. So with that combined with my passion for agriculture, I decided to go and study a Bachelor of Agriculture Business Management through Charles Sturt University back home. So in 2023, I graduated with my Bachelor's of Agriculture Business Management. And I started my Master's in Communications in 2024 whilst working full-time. So I've been doing that part-time and then have deferred that for a year whilst I took the time to come to K-State and kind of chase a different dream.
And when did you arrive at K-State?
I arrived in the middle of January, so right in the middle of the cold snap here in Kansas. So it was definitely a cold shock, I suppose. Going from the middle of our summer, where we talk in degrees Celsius, but, you know, we're into a 40 degrees Celsius kind of temperature range there, which is 100 plus here. And then, you know, we've dropped to sub-zero temperatures in a matter of 48 hours. It sure was a shock to my system, but, you know, you had to admire it for what it is and its conditions that they deal with here that we definitely don't have at home. Sort of just the variation in temperature range. Ours is a lot more closed and sort of something like different is that we have access to pasture 12 months of a year. So like for my family doing grass-fed operation, we are actually able to do that versus the higher sort of grain production in fed cattle sort of here in the States.
What are some similarities, however, that you see between U.S. agriculture and Australian agriculture?
Yeah, so I grew up in the hills, which has been kind of cool. So coming into the Flint Hills, you know, it's sort of similar to home, like big rolling plains. You know, we still produce heaps of crop production. So, you know, they use headers, they use chaser bins. They do all the same kind of stuff here in terms of that cropping side of it. Cattle really are raised the same kind of globally. It doesn't really, you know, they just need their basics. And, you know, ET, AI services, joining, bull selection, it's all very, very similar. It's just really, yeah, the way that the climate affects agriculture over here is a little different in terms of calving sort of in sub-zero temperatures, having those, you know, extra shelters and heated calving barns and little things like that make a difference. Just the adaptability, I would say, is what sort of is a little different over here, but everyone adapts to their climates globally. And yeah, we just have a very different climate. So that's been interesting to come over and get a bit of an eye-opening.
What have you been up to then while you've been at K-State these past few months?
Yeah, so as part of my scholarship, I'm really fortunate to kind of have a bit of a choose your own adventure go. So I've been lucky to sit in on a couple of classes through ASI, a couple of classes with Ag Econ, and a couple of classes in Ag Communications. So really kind of broad spectrum. Animal science is kind of my passion for genetics and evaluation, and then Ag Comms and Ag Economics is really my degree that I've got from back home. Writing, I really enjoy writing. I enjoy telling stories, people's stories, specifically agriculture. And Ag Economics is really that strategic thinking, and that sort of helped me to sort of build further on my degree that I've already got. And then I was really fortunate to meet the Gardner family, and so I spent about a month down there with them in the lead up to their April sale, and got to sort of see all that unfold, which was just really cool to have a sale run for 6 hours, and we sort of sell 1,100 head of cattle. It's a big thing, and it's not something that we would do as a single kind of stud sale back home. So to be a part of that was probably one of my favourite experiences. But yeah, I've just really loved college life and getting involved in it.
Charlotte, what's your next adventure?
Well, that's it's an open-ended question for me. I'm really just keeping my opportunities open. I haven't sort of set anything in stone yet. I guess you could say this year's nearly kind of a self-discovery year. But it's really just come I've fallen back in love with production agriculture. Whilst I've been here, I've always loved it, but, if you'd asked me when I actually graduated university, I was like, yeah, I'm going to go and I'm going to write and I'm going to do marketing, and that's going to be my whole life. And then over here, doing my animal science, I've fallen back. I've really come back to that, my roots in evaluation and selection and that. And then my time at Gardner's, getting my hands dirty and getting actually back involved in production ag has been really cool. So honestly, I don't know, but we're just going to sort of see where the wind blows me when I get home. But yeah, just keep my options open, and it'll definitely be within the beef industry somewhere.
So as we wrap up today's conversation, what makes you excited for agriculture as you look forward?
The possibilities, technology is getting better. I think the way that technology works in agriculture is that it won't ever replace people's jobs. It'll always just make them easier. So that's a really exciting kind of aspect. But I love just watching the next generation. I am the next generation, but I'm also heavily involved in youth programs back in Australia as well, just kind of harbouring and fostering those that are even younger than me, and hoping that I can help them keep their passion for agriculture right from a young age all the way through. So yeah, just the people and the way that agriculture is headed as we sort of evolve into a new world.
Charlotte, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much.
That was Charlotte Nugent from New South Wales, Australia, sharing about her experience here at Kansas State University. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back.
Tuned in to Agriculture Today. I'm Jacob Cloughton for Shelby Varner, and we wrap up our Wednesday show with K-State's Jason Warner, Brad White, and Bob Larson on the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast.
I think some big things that I always think are really important to go back and take a look at for our spring calving cow herds that are coming out of the calving season now, or maybe just wrapping up that calving season. Going back and looking at, relative to the number of pregnant females that we had at the start of the calving season, what was the number of live calves that we have on the ground now? And also, being able to go back and look at it from, how many females did we expose for breeding? However we did that, whether that was through AI, natural service, ET, however we did that, how many females did we expose relative to the number of live calves that we have now? And so I just think this is a really good time of the year for folks to be going back and reviewing some of those basic records and understanding some of those calculations, regardless of whether you're spring calving or if maybe you're a fall calver producer and you're getting ready to wean calves now here and maybe here in May or early on into June. But understanding what those numbers are, so you can come back and calculate, okay, am I having some challenges in terms of the number of calves that I think I'm going to be able to wean? Am I having some losses somewhere in the system? And where can we intervene, or do we need to make some changes with how we're managing? And that facilitates a much stronger conversation, or a much more educated conversation with practicing veterinarian, your nutritionist, whoever that person is you might be working with, to be able to work through some of those things.
Excellent. So number of live calves per cow exposed, and by pregnant cow that started the calving season, 2 lines on my scorecard. Bob, do you have other things I should put on there?
Yeah, one of the other ones that I've really try to keep an eye on is how many calves were born in the first 21 days. So the first estrus cycle, I would like to see 65% of the calves born in the first 21 days. And I think that gives me a good target to continually improve. Because there's 2 pieces of information. One, like Jason said, is just number of calves born and then weaned per cow exposed. But I want them to be born early. And you could say the first 21 days, which is like 65%, or you could say the first 42 days, the first 2 estrus cycles. I'm going to want 85% or so born in the first 42 days. I want almost all my calves born early in that calving season. And that one of the reasons I like that tells me that they came through the winter well, that my bulls were fertile, my cows were in good body condition at the start of the breeding season, and I'm not losing a lot of calves either through abortion during pregnancy or early calf death loss. So if I can do all of those things well, I'll have a high percentage of those calves born in the first 21 days.
Yep, I like those. And potentially adding, Bob mentioned calf death loss or calf illness. Probably keep a tally sheet for those too. How often do those occur? And you have to have some expectations, right? So I'm going to briefly ask you guys, so the number of live calves per pregnant cows, what's kind of your expectation for what that percent should be?
So if you're looking at live calves weaned relative to the number of pregnant females, you really should be 90% or higher, somewhere in there. You know, if you look at it, if you expose 100 females at the start of the breeding season, you should be able to get somewhere between 85 to 90 live calves on the ground at the end of the calving season.
Yeah. So
and then at the end of the weaning period.
So by weaning, 85 to 90% calves weaned per cow exposed, and then 90+% for cows pregnant that ended up weaning off those calves. And Bob, you gave us 65% in the first 21, 85% in the first 42. And then for the calf mortality, do you have between birth and weaning, you got a ballpark?
Well, USDA has the NAMS, the National Animal Health Monitoring Service, and they put the abortion loss, national average 1% to 2%, and I think that's pretty close. I think for a lot of our herds, you will lose a few pregnancies, so around 1%, maybe just a tad more in some situations. And calf death loss is somewhat similar. 2% or so of calves born may not make it to weaning.
That's all we have for now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.